to another session of Signals Music Studio. You are now ready to learn.
I am now ready to learn.
You will remember all you are taught.
I will remember all I am taught.
You have a deep desire to smash that like button. Now when I count to 3, you will become fully alert and ready to begin the lesson. 1, 2, 3.
I'm Jake Lizio, and in this video, we're going to explore the world of musical drones and pedal tones. Now, this is a very simple concept, but it can have some very advanced applications. So we're going to start pretty simple, and then we'll introduce some gradually more complex topics. To begin, a drone is simply a sustained note. And when we talk about drone music, we mean that that note is being sustained through the entire song, not just for a few measures or something. Now, there's entire genres of music that rely heavily on the drone concept, specifically Carnatic and Hindustani music from India. The tanpura is tuned to a root and a fifth, and as it plays, it creates this wonderfully warm drone sound. Similarly, the sitar has drone strings as well. And on top of these steady droning notes, Indian performers have a wide variety of scales that they can use to compose or improvise with over. And we'll actually experiment with some of that stuff at the end of this video. But these styles of music are very old, and they didn't find their way to the Western world until about the 1960s. That's when the Beatles took a lot of trips, and some of those trips were to India. And when they were in India, they were heavily influenced by Indian music and culture. The first mainstream Western drone song I can point you to is the Beatles' Tomorrow Never Knows, which starts off with a sitar drone and relies heavily on just one note, C, on the bass guitar through the entire song. Lay down all thoughts, surrender to the void. Now on the Sgt. Pepper's album, George Harrison wrote Within You Without You, which obviously employs the Indian drone technique, but also utilizes many more elements of Indian music. However, my favorite example of the Beatles employing this technique is in Blue Jay Way. That song starts off with just a single C note droning on the organ and ends with that same C note droning all the way through. There's a fog upon LA. But when most people listen to that song, I don't think they're picking up Indian or Carnatic vibes. So I do think it's a great example of employing these techniques without having it sound too different from what we would define as Western mainstream music. Now, even though the Beatles experimented with this concept pretty heavily, it didn't really catch on in the Western world. I was hard-pressed to find you many examples of something that would actually classify as drone music that made it to the mainstream. One example I'll give you is the song Pepper by Butthole Surfers. That song really has no chords. It just has one underlying note. And the verse sections don't have any note. So it's a drone for most of the song, and then for the other parts of the song, there's just nothing going on. It's just drums and vocals that don't have a real melody to it. But it does create that drone vibe that you may have recognized from that Indian Carnatic style. I don't mind the sun sometimes, the images it shows. I can taste you on. But I do think there's hope on the horizon for drone music, especially with the resurgence of doom metal and drone metal. A lot of these styles rely on just one tone running through the entire thing. The band I'll point you to is Sun. Specifically, their song Frost is a great example of how evil and dark and powerful something like just a simple drone can be for your compositions. Now, what's really important in all of these examples is how it makes us feel. There's something very specific and unique to the drone sound that affects us in a very unique way. For me personally, it taps into a stranger, more abstract, trance-like meditative state. And I think that's why you hear these things a lot in meditation music and calming ambient songs. It really has a profound effect on just your biophysiology when you hear a static note as opposed to a bunch of changing notes. So I do think as a composer, it's kind of important to keep that in mind. If you're trying to write something that's supposed to elicit some otherworldly or religious or holy vibe, something that's, contacting the spirit world or tapping deep within. I feel like drones are where you want to go for something like that, because it's immediately kind of put your brain into that space. But droning doesn't have to sound whacked out and really psychedelic. Actually, there's a lot of examples of it on the acoustic guitar that just sound nice and modern and shimmery and kind of bright and happy. You see, when guitarists play an E major, the E major chord has a natural E string ringing out and a natural B string ringing out. And guitar players can play bar chords, but still leave those strings ringing out. So here's my B and E still ringing out. Here's my B and E still ringing out. As I play through different chords of E major, you can hear the entire time I've got B and E droning away. So it's very common to hear this technique on acoustic guitar, and we could still call that a drone. And some songs do this all the way through, where those notes just drone through the whole thing. But it doesn't create the same effect because we're not droning way down low on the bass, we're droning up higher, and it creates just the static consistency, the single thread, this tether to the entire chord progression. It's a really nice effect, and it doesn't get really weird and wonky. Simple example of this being heard is in Dave Matthews' Crash, is all in E major or C sharp minor, and those notes B and E just keep droning on the top as the bass notes change underneath. And if we switch keys to the key of G, we know a few songs that employ this technique almost through the entire song. Green Day's Good Riddance, which pretty much every acoustic guitar player has learned. Every single one of those chords has a high D ringing out, and that's why my ring finger never has to move when I'm playing this song. So even though, once again, we're not getting into the psychedelic drone territory, every one of these chords has this D ringing out, and that really creates a nice amount of consistency, really nice secure feeling through all those chord changes. Now let's talk about something that is very close to the concept of a drone, and that's a pedal tone. So if a drone is something that occurs through our entire song, a pedal tone is something that occurs through maybe just a smaller section of our song. So imagine you've got like 4 measures or 16 measures, some decent length of music, but there is some consistent note that is being sustained. That sustained note would be called a pedal tone, but you could still call it a drone note. And we do hear this stuff a lot in Western music. The first example I'll point us to is Pink Floyd's Us and Them. That's a D sus2, and that has D on the bass. Then it moves up to E sus2, and that has still D on the bass. We're just keeping it there. Now an F augmented triad, but we keep the D on the bass. And now a G major triad with, once again, D on the bass. So all 3 of these chords have that single bass note that kind of keeps everything together a little bit, even though the chords are a little dissonant themselves. Or you can think of the little section from Stairway to Heaven. We've got an A minor 7 chord, and then we have 3 chords that are all pedaled over the D note. We have an E minor over D, we have a D, a C over D, and then back to D. So really nice voicing for those chords. Listen again. When they're all pedaled over D, imagine if I didn't pedal. Imagine if I just played regular E minor, regular D, regular C, regular D. Hear how chunky that chord change is? Hear how much movement there is in that? As opposed to when we pedal it, how slidey it is, how much floatier it is when there's that just static tether there. We could also pedal it over a different note. Let's try pedaling it all over an E note. So here's E minor over E. Here's D major over E. Here's C major over E. D major over E. Pretty cool, right? So completely different effect than just the regular chords, just by playing around with a pedal tone on the bass. Now, as a composer, I think it's really important to know that you can basically get away with murder if you've got a steady bass note. A steady droned bass can handle an incredible amount of dissonance without it getting too wild. As long as things are moving, there's going to be a sense of stability and comfort there. So I think this is fun to compose with. Here's what I'll try to demonstrate for you. We'll play an A major chord with A on the bass. And what we'll do is the highest note of my chord right now is an E. What I'll do is I'll just ascend this note up chromatically, 1 note at a time. And I'll try to harmonize that with just random various triads, just experimenting with different triads. But underneath every single one of these, there will be a steady A bass note. And that should create a really nice sense of consistency, some really epic, grand movement. So to begin, I have an A major chord with E on the melody. I'm going to move my melody up note to F. And the chord that I'm going to give that is A augmented. Now I'll move my F up to F sharp, and the chord I'll give that is a D major over A. Then I'll move my F sharp up to G, and the chord I'll give that is just a G major over A. My G goes up to G sharp, and I give it an E major over A. My G sharp moves up to A, and I'm going to give it an F major over A. But then I'll stay on that A note to just play an A chord. So hearing all those chords in order with the bass note underneath, staying on A, majestic chord progression, and a lot of that majesty comes from that steady pedaled bass. And if we produce it with some more majestic sounding instruments, we can really get some excitement out of this. So I took the same chord progression, I put it on some strings and some vocal patches, and then I just took an electric guitar and had that plow away at an A note underneath along with some bass and drums, and it sounds pretty big. So that's a bass pedal tone, but I want to talk about a melody pedal tone now, because this opens up the door to my favorite exercise ever for a musician. I don't care what instrument you play. I think this is one of the best things you can possibly do if you're into writing interesting chord progressions. Start with a single note, like A, all right? We'll just take A, and we ask ourselves, only using major chords and minor chords, that's all we'll use right now. What kind of major chords and minor chords have an A as the root? Well, that's pretty easy. A major has an A on the root. A minor has A on the root, right? So this A note could be happening over an A minor chord. It could be happening over an A major, obviously. Now, ask yourself, A could be the third of what major chord or minor chord? Well, A could be the third of an F sharp minor chord, right? Or it could be the third of an F major chord, right? So all of these chords I've played so far, A major, A minor, F sharp minor, F major, they all have A on melody. And we can keep going. What chords have A as the fifth? Well, you might be able to figure out that D major has A as the fifth, and D minor has A as the fifth, right? So let's go through all of these chords that just have one constant note on top. I'll just sing the A, and I want you to hear how different and random and strange all these weird chords. These chords have nothing to do with one another, but they all feel familiar because they're all tied together by a single A note, one single pedal tone. So here's like A major, and now we've got F sharp minor, and now we've got D major, and now we've got D minor, and now we've got F major, and then back to A minor, right? All those chords have some consistency in between them. And don't just limit yourself to major and minor chords if you're already experienced with this stuff. Ask yourself, what kind of chord could A be the seventh of? Well, it could be the seventh of a B7. It could be the seventh of a B minor 7. It could be the seventh of a B flat major 7 or a B flat minor major 7. So all these different chords can still accommodate this note. And even though they have no tonal relationship to each other besides this one common tone, you can still get away with some awesome chord progressions just using that pedal tone technique. The four chords we're going to compose with to demonstrate this technique are a D major, and that has A on the melody. And then we're going to switch right over to a B flat major 7, which also has A on the melody. And then we're going to play a G add 9, and the A is going to be the added ninth. So that is still on the melody. And then finally, we're just going to play an F major chord with A on the melody. And then the whole chord progression can repeat. And I think that chord progression would work well for kind of like a low, down-tempo dance tune. So I put it on some synthesizers and got this sound. Now in that example, the bass note was changing to complement each chord, but let's do some double drone stuff here, and let's just have the bass note stay on our D note through the entire change. So not only is our A note being static, but we've got some chords changing in between, and our bass note is also being static on the note D. Hopefully you hear, those are different effects, and that's what this is all about. Pedaling gives us a different effect, and as a composer, you want to be able to identify that effect and know when to use it, when to employ that effect. Now I'd like to explore my favorite aspect of working with a drone, and that's the fact that a drone is basically a blank canvas. You can paint anything you want on top of it. You can pick any scale, play it on top of a droned note, and it's going to work. You see, when we use full chords, we can get into a lot of trouble. Imagine I have an A minor chord playing in the background. An A minor chord has the notes A, C, and E in it. And if I decide to play the A major scale on top of it, I can get into trouble, because my A major scale has a C sharp in it. And in my opinion, it doesn't sound very good to play something like a C sharp on top of a chord that has a C natural in it. So when I'm using a full chord, I can get in trouble. But if I have just an A note playing, I can play any scale on top and it's going to sound fine. So here we just hear an A note, and here is my A major scale. Sounds just fine. But I could just as easily switch to the minor scale, and we're experiencing a little bit of modal mixture. And I could do something more obscure like A Lydian dominant. And it's a great way to experience that sound just over a single note. Here's another one. We'll do A harmonic minor. All over just a single note. You can hear how nice and how effective those scales sound. We can really hear them. We can really, experience their full nature when we have just a single drone underneath. So it's really important as a composer to keep in mind, by taking away the notes of a chord, you create more possibilities. So if you're with a band and you're jamming, it's kind of interesting to think about removing chords for a little bit and letting your lead players really stretch out so they can experiment with more scales and not have to worry about clashing so much. To demonstrate this, I wrote a little solo using 6 different scales, and that way you can hear back to back how interesting a single note can sound if you decide to paint over it with 6 different colors. That backing track is available on my website. I've got links below in the description, and it also includes backing tracks over just a major chord, a minor chord, and all of the harmonic minor modes as well, since I did make that backing track for my last video on the modes of harmonic minor. But there's one last thing I want to mention before we wrap up this video, and that's the concept of pedal point. This is really simple stuff, but a pedal point just means that we're repeating a note after every other note. So imagine after every note I play, the note E rings out. So here's like playing up the E minor scale with pedal point. So we can think of an E right now as being a pedal tone, but when we use the phrase pedal tone, we usually mean something being sustained. And as a guitar player, you'll see this stuff pop up a lot, because the open strings are so easy to get to that often guitar players will just pull off to those open strings and naturally create a little bit of pedal point motion in the middle of a guitar riff or a solo. So basically, the idea is that pedal point is related to a pedal tone in the sense that we have a constant reoccurrence of a note, but pedal point specifically means we're kind of returning to that note as a staccato note or not as a sustained note. So to summarize, the drone is a very versatile effect. If you do it way down low and for long periods of time, you can create that really powerful meditative psychedelic trance effect. Up on higher notes and on different modern sounding instruments, we can create really nice, pleasing, shimmering, acoustic-y, folksy sounds. And by experimenting with pedal tones in smaller sections of music, we can radically transform chord progressions and make them sound totally different and give them a completely different weight just by pedaling them over a single note. And lastly, when you hear a drone ringing out, that is a green light to experiment and do different scales, different tones, different things that you might not normally be able to do when you're locked into the world of a major or minor triad. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. If you did enjoy this video, please thank my awesome Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. They certainly earned my appreciation and hopefully yours as well. If you'd like to support this channel, you can join them, or you can consider buying my music theory course, which is available on my website. You can check the description below for the links. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.